Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Professionals Unplugged. I am your host Utkarsh Shukla. Let me introduce you to my guest Mark. Mark, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mark. So let's begin with our very basic question. Can you please introduce our audience about yourself, like who you are, what work you do, anything you want to talk about yourself?
Oh gosh. Okay, so this is always the fun part for me. My name is Mark Smeets. I'm in Vancouver, BC. And who I am and what I do is a whole other it's a whole other fun question now. Um I'll explain it the way that I sort of do for most people is not that I have two lives, far from it. I'm not like a spy or a secret agent, but I would say in my older quote unquote life, I was actually in logistics for 14 years and moved freight all around the world and all that kind of fun stuff. But my heart was never in that. And when our son was born, my wife and I knew nothing about autism or disabilities or any of that. So I basically went from, knowing nothing about that and learning tons of it to really becoming an advocate for disabilities, specifically ADHD and autism. And yeah, that's where my life is now centered and focused, and it's been one hell of an awesome journey.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So as you mentioned, you have been in logistics, so you have changed your career like this, or what's the backstory of it, if you can share?
Well, I fell into logistics by mistake. It was an accident. It was I remember the very first interview I had, they gave me a map of Canada and they said, we want you to label all the provinces and everything. And I got about half of it right. Somehow I still got the interview. and and I ended up there, but it was before that time. Actually, I should back up a tiny bit. I had also been in web design and databases and the IT side. So in the 90s, when the internet really took off, that's what I was also doing. So the when I this is the word I'm looking for. Um, when got into logistics, I was able to use a lot of the technical skills that I had and just come up with the ideas that I would come up with to look for something, or why things happened, that kind of thing. Because my role in, at least in one of the jobs I had, was as a tracer. So if a package went missing, I went looking for it. I'd send, warehouse checks all over the planet, and that was a lot of fun. So it was always trying to understand, like, why did this plane lose this can that had this package in it? Why was it left behind? What is the process behind that? And that was that was certainly very interesting. From there on, I stayed there because it was just the job. It was never.
Hmm.
I was passionate about making the connections with people
Hmm.
and solving the problems and seeing the process, but I was never. Yeah, logistics as a whole, whatever. You've seen one package, you've seen them all, kind of thing. But it was the process behind it and the human side behind it that I was always very attracted to, but I didn't understand why. So when fast forwarding to about 2018, the last long-term logistics role that I had, I was there with this company for about 6 or 7 years.
Hmm.
They laid us off and closed the office and moved everything back east to Toronto. And so I wanted to pursue process improvement and roles within healthcare. And that's how I met our mutual friend, Karen Ross. And that whole journey in itself was great. But when skipping a little further ahead, the last job I had, the office ended up burning down, and that ended up laying me off as well. So when that moment happened, now I don't know if you've ever been in a fire, but it's a little stressful. And once I made it, once once the initial shock of everything wore off, I had to take care of I ended up having to take care of myself. And I'd already been, like, my wife and I had already been focused on our family and trying to learn everything that we could. Um, and we did, we learned tons. But I needed to focus on me. And that's where the switch happened. Because about a year or something after that, I got my ADHD diagnosis. And everything just changed from that point on because I began to take care of myself much better. So that's kind of how it got to where it was in a nutshell.
Yeah. So it's like you have gone through a lot of journey, a lot of ups and downs in your life, right? And now here you are where you have learned that you need to take care of yourself as well, apart
Yeah,
from your surroundings and following your passion, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
right.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you the same thing, like now how a day looks like in your life, like how is it? Like, what are the work that you are doing your day-to-day basis as an
Well,
advocate of practice?
you know what? Instead of working with freight, I'm working with kids
Okay.
and and people in general. So kind of the life of an advocate in a way is and there's a couple other jobs that I have as well because it's not just one job. That the advocate's sort of the self job, so to speak. But there's work I do within the school district. Just working with kids and looking after them, and it is fun to talk to kids and to see what they know about themselves and to talk them through ways that you could finding ways to calm yourself, finding ways to be true to yourself, and understanding the differences that everybody has because we all do have differences, right? The When I'm working with one of the other jobs I have is as a support worker and swim coach for a group called the Canucks Autism Network, and I will teach kids that are autistic how to swim. And I taught my son how to swim, which was really awesome, and my daughter as well. And to teach other kids how to swim, it's amazing how, like, autism's got nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with the fact that you've got somebody who wants to learn how to swim, and their body works in a different way. So how do you help them realize and get how do you help them move their body and work what they have to work with in a way that is natural to them and is empowering to them? Because we never want to force something that's against someone's will. So those are the two kind of sort of day-to-day things. And on the advocacy side of things, there's talking to the government. There's getting involved in municipal, like our citywide initiatives and things like that. So for example, in September of last year, in 2023, I did a presentation to the city that I live in to do to bring in what I call regular scheduled sensory-friendly swim times. And when you go to the pool, you don't have instead of having all the lights on and all the music on and it's just loud and overwhelming. The idea was to redirect, reduce, or eliminate a lot of the common triggers that make it hard for kids and people in general to go into an environment. Like if you go to a mall, why do you have to listen to music every single time? And half the time the music sucks anyways. Um, you go into a pool and you've got the same thing. It's like people think it's still the 1980s. At least that might be more of a Western reference, but when big pool parties and things like that. But for kids with disabilities, it can be really overwhelming. So when I made that presentation, I had just a ton of support from different advocacy groups, politicians, business associations as well, and it went live December 14th, 2023. So I'm very proud of that. But that's the kind of stuff that I look to get into, and it's so much fun to do. Like you're we don't think about accessibility and we don't think about how to make something accessible, we're very much, what's the word? We don't build these things in, and we expect people to jump through these hoops. Well,
Correct.
someone with a disability isn't going to feel that way. They're not going to be able to speak up for themselves as much. Anyways, so yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Like as you mentioned, you're trying to help the kids who are with disabilities to come up with the regular life. So can you just tell us more about autism? As you mentioned, I'm also not much aware of that term. So,
Well,
right.
I mean, I guess I want to clarify the question you want me to answer. Excuse me. Do you want, like, in terms of telling you a bit about autism, where do you want me to hit that? I guess. How would you like me, what specifically would you like me to nail into, if there's something extra before I dive into my own little rabbit hole?
If you can explain it as a layman terms, like how we should see it and how we should.
Oh, cool. Yeah, done. Okay. Yep. Yep. So one trick that I have, actually just kind of backing up for a second, is I have my Word document open, and I always make notes when I'm or having a conversation with someone. It's a really smart tool to sit there and have. So if anybody listening to this is ADHD, open up your Word document and write stuff, because our working memory sucks. Anyways, so I'm going to try and touch on both as to what they are, and I'm also going to hit on language, because the language and rhetoric is a really important piece. So let's start with, okay, I guess the one caveat I'm going to give is when I describe both of these, the diagnostic manual, which is the manual, it's the psychological manual that is used to define what these things are.
Yeah.
A lot of the language is very deficit based. It's what you have, there's something wrong with you. And I don't approach it from that. I approach it from a very strengths based perspective. That's it. So, excuse me. In terms of ADHD, or even autism for that matter, your brain is wired a certain way. It is wired in a sense that what may look like repetitive actions, or something that may just seem like odd, and the focus on behavior, and a lot of it's focused on behavior, is out of the social norm. So perhaps you need to have a certain, now this is going to be a little bit odd to explain it, but autism really is actually a collection of different diagnoses. So you have to have these quote unquote deficits in speech and language. You need to have them in in understanding social cues, and that's that area. And there's one more, your executive function, which I will get to in a minute, which is the idea of keeping yourself organized. And there was one more, which I completely forgot. But anyways, it's really, that's what it's really about. So if you have someone that, is doing constant repetitive motions, and that could be what's called a stem. Maybe they're hand flapping, or maybe they're making sounds or something like that. We all have different ways of the way that we process something. So that might just be how it is for that person. And for that matter, autism is different from person to person to person, to be quite honest. I'll jump over to the ADHD side of things, because the two are side by side. They're not one and the same as of yet. That may change in a couple of years, who knows? But in the ADHD side, really what that is about is your ability to retain information, or your working memory, your ability to keep yourself organized and either on task, starting a task, or completing a task. So if you like, for me, for example, I have all these awesome, grandiose ideas, and I might start it, but you think I'm going to finish it off? Nope, because something else interesting has happened.
Correct.
And that's where an ADHD brain is wired to be an interest-based brain. It is not so much about the idea of you are keeping, you can't organize yourself. It's just that your brain is just going to the next thing that's interesting, and the next thing that's interesting, and the next thing. And sometimes you just don't stop. That's what ADHD is. The ability to keep yourself organized and everything. A lot of the literature focuses on just that, but it doesn't go beyond that piece of it. Anyways, that's one of the other things. There's also the emotional regulation side of things, where if somebody was to make a comment to you, just as a silly example, you know what? Why is Bob in the office always yelling? Well, it could be because that emotion, that little emotion, is like this to him. It's big. And he doesn't have any other way to process it. And that's just how it comes out. There's the other piece of ADHD, sorry, I should add in what's called rejection sensitivity and rejection sensitivity dysphoria. The idea behind that is, if I say something to you that's not meant as a criticism, maybe I give you a piece of feedback like, oh, look at the hash marks on your jacket or your shirt. Oh, those should be vertical.
Yeah.
Like that'd be an interesting design. That'd be an interesting design. But then you will take that as like, oh my God, the jacket is horrible. I have to take this
Yeah.
off. I feel like the
Correct.
worst person in the world. Now, what's interesting is that on the dysphoria side of things, that'll actually translate into physical pain. So it'll feel like your stomach starts to tight up in knots, or you may feel nauseous or something like that. Your back hurts, whatever it shows up for you, who knows what it is. But that's sort of the difference between all those things. So when you're in a work environment and your boss was to give you a piece of feedback, that may hurt a lot, even though they may not mean it in a mean way. But there's no control the other person has over that. We don't talk about it's like the guy jokes of men don't talk about feelings. It's not that different. It's pretty much the same. So let me segue into, that's about as good of an overview as I can give of really ADHD, autism, as far as disabilities. The language piece, there's a lot of terms that hang around that are these outdated terms and what we call ableist terms. And ableism is something that, if you were to ask somebody with no legs to stand up, not only are you a jerk, but you're ableist, like that kind of thing. So you don't, the language that's there, it's trying to, I always go for the neutral terms. So, and I'll give you an example. And I'm very purposeful about this. When some people will say workplace adaptations, but I don't talk about adaptations, because the way a process works is that if I'm going to work for you, I may not feel comfortable telling you that, number one, I have a disability, and number two, I may not necessarily know what I need. You, on the other hand, have this power to say, you know what, is there a way that we can bring in, do you need like a desk that's like a motorized standing desk? Do you need an office by the window? Do you need to close your door? Do you need to be away from traffic and all the other distractions? Those kind of things. Those are what I call accessibility tools. That's it. And using the word adaptation, it's like, it's asking you to adapt. Whereas anybody with a disability, that's all they have to do is adapt to a world that's not built for them. So why are we using a term with that kind of connotation? And it should be more of a neutral term like accessibility. That's that's one of them. Other phrases like we don't say special needs because we all have special needs. The fact that Bobby, whoever, needs to have a glass of wine in the evening to unwind from work is that person's special need. You going for a walk in the afternoon during lunch is your special need. So it's not it's exact, and another term would be in the same vein is differently abled. Like we're all differently abled.
Right.
These are not terms that help move anything or do anything. They're not good. So we avoid those kind of terms, and anything that really, and at the same time, they're not humanizing terms.
Yeah.
If I ask you, can you adapt yourself to this? I'm like, well, I don't know if I can really adapt myself, but I'm not a chair, or I'm not I'm not a piece of furniture. Like, I'm a human being. So that's why you try to go the neutral words like accessibility. It just makes more sense. There's probably a ton of other specific words I could probably come up with. But if you sit there and think up something, ask, because that's one of the things I love doing is I love being that educator. I love being able to talk about these things and break down those barriers, because this is where my heart is. Like, this is it. And maybe I'll give you one more little story as to why this has sort of happened. When we got our son's autism diagnosis last April, and that's a whole other journey story. But I was excited because after all these years, and we waited a long time. After all these years, we got it, and it was I was happy, and it was like, oh my gosh, we got his diagnosis. And people would ask me questions, and then they would say comments like, wow, that must be hard, or I'm sorry, or oh gosh, anything like that. And I was going, like, I was bummed out. I couldn't figure, I didn't I it took me a while to figure it out. And then once I did, I realized, don't you realize how amazing my son is? Like, and you're saying how hard something is, but you really have no idea what actually is hard about being just a parent in general. And that's what got me to really, that's sort of what solidified a lot of things that I used to not care about the rhetoric too as much. But that realization was a very big step of, I want people to feel this for every kid. Like, if you're autistic, if you're an ADHDer, you are awesome. Like, I want to hear about your strengths, your gifts. I don't want to hear about what you can't do. I want to hear about what you can do.
Right.
That's it.
That's pretty awesome. I think it was very insightful talking to you, like, as you have shared how these things, like where the environment that has been set up to you, how you have grown on the same, and the way you have defined me all those terms. It was really amazing. I got to know, like, people are not all of us are different in some of the way. All of us have our different needs. So it is not correct to name people on the basis of how their brain is designed or what their needs are. There should be common terms for everyone, right? And as you mentioned, like those language things that should also be prevented. We should have a common language for every one of us. So it was really very special for me to have this convo with you. And it is really insightful, and I hope all our audience, whosoever is going to listen to this, can understand.
I mean,
everyone of us are same. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too, and this I think is something that's very helpful, because because one thing I do love to do is I love to write. And what I have found a little tricky, and this may help someone at some point, but when you're using the language, being aware of the kind of language that you're using, and there's, I guess, 3 terms to talk about. So there's identity-based language, there's person-oriented language, and then community. So, for example, let's say you have someone who is, let's go with, they're in a mobility device, a wheelchair. And if they're in a wheelchair, that maybe they're a paraplegic and they can't walk. So that may be it for them. They may not be ADHD. They still have a disability. That's fine. Kind of think of it as a hierarchy. So the community that they're in, they're in that physical disability community. Cool. Okay. There's that sort of one group. Then you've got maybe somebody who identifies as both. Let's say they're autistic and they can't walk and they're in a wheelchair, and they're going to fall into, not just the physical one, but they're going to expand into what's the other word I'm looking for? It'll come to me. But you have that. So figure out what sort of community that you're talking to.
Okay.
Because someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, or whatever the correct term is, and I apologize to anybody listening if I got that wrong, they may not be on the neurodivergent side. Okay, cool, that's fine. When you get to, so once you've sort of identified your community, then understanding the identity language versus the person-oriented language. So if I say, for example, I'm a person with ADHD, I'm using a person-first orientation. But if I say I'm an ADHDer or I'm autistic, then that is identity-first language. A lot of people will mix the two together, and that's perfectly fine. The key is that I'm the one doing the mixing, or my son's doing the mixing. It's within our power to do that. A lot of the mistake gets made when other people who don't have a disability try to just find it for someone else. But anyways, yeah, that's a very helpful thing to keep in mind when you're trying to figure this stuff out. Figure out your community, figure out your language to which you're using. Is it identity or person oriented, and then go from there. And quite honestly, no different than gender pronouns or someone's orientation. Ask them how they identify. It's the same concept.
I think that's the best thing to end this interview, and I hope this was very insightful for all of us, and we can grow from here. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining in. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me on, Utkarsh. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the chance to talk about this.
Thank you.